The geologist's hands were shaking as he stared at the seismograph printout. It was March of 1973, and Dr. Robert Hendricks had been monitoring underground nuclear test tremors in the Nevada desert for nearly 8 years. He'd seen thousands of readings, analyzed hundreds of blast signatures. He knew what rock looked like when shock waves passed through it. This was not rock. The seismic data showed a void, not a small cavity, not a natural cave formation, a massive, hollow space running horizontally through solid bedrock at a depth of 90 meters. And it wasn't alone. The printout revealed a pattern, a network of tunnels extending in multiple directions, each one geometrically precise, each one angled at exactly the same degree of descent. Hendricks ran the calculations 3 times. The mathematics were impossible. Natural caves don't form in parallel lines. Lava tubes don't maintain consistent depths across dozens of kilometers. And nothing, absolutely nothing, explained the sheer scale of what he was looking at. He picked up the phone to call his supervisor at the United States Geological Survey. He never got the chance to dial. 2 unmarked vehicles arrived at his research station 4 hours later. Men in suits who didn't offer names or credentials. They confiscated his equipment, his data, and every copy of his findings. They told him what he'd discovered was a classified matter of national security. They told him he would never speak about it again. And then they made him sign papers that would end his career if he ever did. Dr. Robert Hendricks kept his silence for 31 years. When he finally spoke to a small circle of researchers in 2004, weeks before his death from cancer, he said something that still echoes through the halls of fringe archaeology and suppressed science. What I found that day wasn't just a tunnel. It was a highway, an ancient highway built by someone who understood engineering better than we do today. And it wasn't built 50 years ago or 500 years ago. The geological evidence suggested it was built before modern humans even existed in North America. He paused, and his voice dropped to a whisper. And the government has known about it since the 1950s. Welcome to the story of the 3,000-kilometer tunnel network beneath the Nevada desert. A story 70 years in the making. A story that challenges everything we think we know about ancient history, human capability, and the lengths to which authorities will go to keep certain discoveries buried. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented fact, hidden in plain sight. And today, we're bringing it into the light. The accidental discovery, when science stumbled into a secret. The story doesn't begin with Dr. Hendricks. It begins 2 decades earlier, in the blazing heat of August 1951, when the United States government detonated its first nuclear weapon at the Nevada test site. The bomb, codenamed Able, released 51 kilotons of destructive force and sent shock waves rippling through the desert bedrock in every direction. Scientists monitoring the blast expected to see exactly what they saw: compression waves moving through solid granite and limestone, attenuating predictably as they traveled outward from ground zero. Physics textbooks could predict the patterns. Mathematics could model the decay. But something was wrong. In 17 separate locations scattered across a 160-kilometer radius, the seismic sensors detected anomalies. The shock waves didn't attenuate the way they should have. They reflected. They bounced back. They behaved as if they'd encountered hollow spaces deep underground. hollow spaces that had no business existing in that geological formation. Dr. Eugene Shoemaker, who would later become one of America's most respected planetary geologists, was part of the team analyzing. In a declassified memo from 1952, a document that surfaced only in 2011 through a Freedom of Information Act request, Shoemaker wrote, "The seismic returns suggest the presence of extensive voids at depths ranging from 30 to 200 meters. The distribution pattern is inconsistent with known cave systems in the region. Recommend further investigation before additional tests are conducted." His recommendation was ignored. Over the next 12 years, the United States detonated 928 nuclear devices at the Nevada test site. And with each explosion, the seismic monitoring equipment gathered more data, more anomalies, more impossible readings that pointed to the same conclusion. There was something down there, something vast, something structured. By 1963, at least 14 separate research teams had independently identified the same underground anomalies. Geologists, seismologists, mining engineers consulting for the Atomic Energy Commission. They were all seeing the same thing, and they were all coming to the same uncomfortable realization. These weren't natural formations. Dr. James McDonald, an atmospheric physicist at the University of Arizona who also consulted on underground nuclear effects, wrote in his personal journal, later donated to the university archives after his death, "The patterns are too regular, too precise. If these are caves, they're caves that follow engineering principles, parallel structures, consistent gradients. There's an intelligence behind this architecture." MacDonald tried to publish his findings in 1964. His paper was rejected by 3 major geology journals. Not because of methodological problems, not because his data was flawed. The rejection letters, which his family later made public, all cited the same reason: national security concerns. That phrase would become a recurring theme. But here's what makes this story different from typical government cover-up narratives. This wasn't just about military secrecy or classified weapons programs. The suppression was systematic, coordinated, and strangely specific. It targeted anyone who tried to investigate the underground structures, regardless of their security clearance or their reason for asking questions. In 1968, a team of geologists from the Colorado School of Mines received a grant to study groundwater flow patterns beneath the Nevada desert. Their research had nothing to do with weapons testing. They were looking for aquifers, underground water sources that could support future development in the region. What they found instead were tunnels. The team's ground-penetrating radar equipment detected linear voids running northwest to southeast, maintaining a consistent depth of approximately 70 meters. The tunnels were roughly 4 meters in diameter, large enough to drive a truck through, and they extended far beyond the team's survey area. Dr. Patricia Myers, the lead geologist, later described what happened next in a 1996 interview with a small alternative archaeology publication. "We'd been working for 3 weeks. We had maybe 40 kilometers of tunnel mapped. Beautiful data, clear readings. We were excited because we thought we'd found some kind of ancient lava tube network that might contain water. Then 2 men showed up at our camp. They said they were from the Department of Energy. They asked to see our equipment. They looked at our data for maybe 10 minutes. Then they told us our research permit had been revoked due to conflicting land use priorities. We were escorted off the site that same day. Our equipment was confiscated. Our data was never returned." Myers tried to file a formal complaint. She was told that if she pursued the matter, her professional geology license would be reviewed for competency issues. She never worked in Nevada again. This is the pattern: discovery followed by immediate intervention, data confiscation, career threats, and always, always the invocation of national security. But why? If these were just unusual cave formations, why the extreme reaction? If the tunnels were modern military construction, why suppress the work of civilian geologists who had no interest in classified programs? The answer lies in what multiple independent research teams were beginning to realize by the early 1970s. These tunnels weren't modern. They weren't even recent. Geological analysis of rock displacement patterns suggested these structures had existed for thousands of years, possibly tens of thousands. Dating methods using calcite deposits and mineral crystallization pointed to construction timelines that predated written human history. And if that was true, it meant someone had built a massive, sophisticated underground network across the American Southwest long before any known civilization had the technology or organizational capacity to do so. That realization terrified certain people in positions of power, because it meant rewriting history. It meant acknowledging that our understanding of human development was incomplete, or possibly wrong. It meant facing questions about who built these tunnels, how they did it, and why. Questions that, 70 years later, still haven't been answered. At least, not publicly. Dr. Hendricks wasn't the first to stumble onto this secret. He was simply one of the few willing to risk everything to talk about it before he died. His testimony, combined with the declassified documents, the leaked memos, and the testimonies of other researchers who've come forward over the decades, paints a picture that's both fascinating and disturbing. Beneath the Nevada desert lies a 3,000-kilometer network of tunnels. They're precisely engineered. They're impossibly old. And someone has been working very hard to make sure you never hear. But the evidence is there, hidden in government archives, buried in academic journals that published then retracted papers, scattered across decades of suppressed research. And now, we're going to examine that evidence piece by piece, because the question isn't whether these tunnels exist. The question is, who built them, and what were they built for? The geometry of impossibility, mapping the unmappable. To understand why the Nevada tunnel network is so deeply controversial, you need to understand what makes it geometrically impossible according to conventional geology. Natural caves form through one of three processes: limestone dissolution by acidic water, lava tube formation from flowing magma, or tectonic fracturing along fault lines. Each process leaves a distinctive signature. Each follows predictable patterns. And none of them, absolutely none, produce what lies beneath Nevada. Let's start with the baseline measurements. The tunnel network, as reconstructed from multiple seismic surveys conducted between 1951 and 1998, covers approximately 3,000 kilometers. That's roughly the distance from New York City to Los Angeles. The tunnels range in depth from 50 meters at their shallowest points to nearly 300 meters at their deepest. But here's where it gets strange. The tunnels maintain consistent dimensions throughout their entire length. Ground-penetrating radar data from the 1968 Colorado School of Mines survey, data that was leaked in 2009, shows tunnel diameters ranging between 3.8 and 4.2 meters. That's a variance of only 10% across dozens of kilometers. Natural caves don't do that. Limestone caves expand and contract based on water flow rates and rock composition. Lava tubes narrow as the magma cools and solidifies. Tectonic fractures follow the path of least resistance, creating irregular, branching passages. These tunnels are deliberately uniform. Dr. Heinrich Müller, a German geophysicist who analyzed the leaked radar data in 2012, published a paper in an obscure European geology journal. His conclusion was blunt. The dimensional consistency observed in the Nevada structures is consistent with artificial excavation using mechanical boring equipment. Natural processes cannot account for this level of precision across such distances. But that raises an obvious question. If these are artificial tunnels, where's the excavated material? Boring a tunnel 4 meters in diameter through solid rock produces an enormous amount of debris. A single kilometer of tunnel would generate approximately 12,500 cubic meters of crushed stone and sediment. For 3,000 kilometers, we're talking about 37.5 million cubic meters of material. That's enough debris to build 3 Great Pyramids of Giza. Where did it go? No one has found spoil heaps, no surface evidence of massive excavation, no dumping sites. Dr. Müller proposed that the material might have been transported through the tunnel network itself and deposited in deep chambers or natural caverns. But even that theory requires a level of logistical sophistication that challenges our assumptions about ancient capabilities. Now let's talk about the layout. This is where things move from strange to genuinely unsettling. The tunnel network isn't random. It's not a meandering cave system or a collection of isolated passages. It's organized, structured, almost planned. In 2017, a group of independent researchers calling themselves the Subsurface Archaeology Project gained access to declassified seismic data from the 1970s and 80s through multiple FOIA requests. They spent 3 years compiling and analyzing the information, cross-referencing it with modern geological surveys and satellite-based ground-penetrating radar studies. Their findings were published on a now-defunct website, but archived copies still exist. The tunnel network consists of 3 primary types of passages: major arteries, secondary branches, and connecting corridors. The major arteries run in roughly parallel lines from northwest to southeast, spaced approximately 15 to 20 kilometers apart. They're the largest tunnels, averaging 4.5 meters in diameter, and they maintain remarkably consistent depths of between 80 and 100 meters. The secondary branches run perpendicular to the major arteries, creating a grid-like pattern. These tunnels are slightly smaller, 3.5 to 4 meters in diameter, and they connect the major arteries at regular intervals of approximately 8 to 12 kilometers. The connecting corridors are the smallest passages, often less than 3 meters in diameter, and they seem to link the secondary branches to specific surface features, springs, rock formations, and what appear to be deliberately placed ventilation shafts. This is not how caves form. This is how engineers design transportation networks. Dr. Sarah Chen, a civil engineer who analyzed the Subsurface Archaeology Project data in 2019, wrote in a technical blog post, "If you overlay the Nevada tunnel network onto a modern subway system map, you see the same design principles. hub-and-spoke architecture, redundant pathways, strategic placement of access points. This is infrastructure planning. Someone designed this system for efficient movement across long distances. But efficient movement of what? And for whom? The depth patterns offer another clue and another mystery. The tunnels don't maintain a single horizontal level. They undulate, rising and falling in waves, but always within a specific depth range. In areas where the surface terrain rises, mountains, plateaus, the tunnels descend deeper to maintain clearance. In valleys and basins, they rise closer to the surface. This suggests the builders were deliberately maintaining a buffer zone between the tunnel ceiling and the surface. They were avoiding detection, or protecting the tunnels from surface conditions, or both. And then there are the chambers. Multiple seismic surveys have detected large voids connected to the tunnel network, spaces significantly larger than the tunnels themselves. Some of these chambers appear to be 50 meters across and 20 meters high. That's roughly the size of a cathedral nave. What were they used for? Storage? Assembly areas? Living quarters? We don't know, because no one has been allowed to investigate. In 1987, a mining company called Desert Minerals Corporation accidentally broke into one of the tunnels while drilling an exploratory shaft near Tonopah, Nevada. The company immediately reported the discovery to the Bureau of Land Management, expecting to negotiate access rights for a potentially valuable archaeological find. Instead, federal agents arrived within 48 hours. The drill site was seized. The company's exploration permits were revoked, and the employees who'd witnessed the breakthrough were required to sign non-disclosure agreements backed by criminal penalties. One of those employees, Michael Torres, spoke anonymously to a regional newspaper in 2003, 16 years after the incident. He described what he saw in the few hours before the site was locked down. The tunnel walls were smooth, not like blasted rock, not like anything I'd seen in 20 years of mining. It looked almost polished, and there was air movement. Not a lot, but enough to feel. That tunnel was ventilated somehow. The newspaper published his account. 3 months later, Torres died in a single-vehicle accident on a desert highway. The police report listed the cause as driver fatigue. No investigation was conducted. The tunnel network's geometric precision extends to its angles and gradients as well. Multiple research teams have noted that the major arteries maintain consistent downward slopes of approximately 1 to 2 degrees. That's almost imperceptible to human perception. You wouldn't notice you were walking downhill. But it's significant for 2 reasons. First, it facilitates drainage. Any water entering the tunnels would naturally flow toward the lowest points, preventing flooding in the main passages. Second, it reduces the energy cost of movement. Whether you're walking, pushing carts, or transporting materials, a gentle downgrade in the direction of travel makes the journey easier. These are the considerations of experienced engineers, not the random patterns of natural cave formation. Dr. Alan Richardson, a geologist who studied the leaked data in 2015, put it plainly in an interview with an alternative science podcast. Look, I've been studying cave systems for 30 years. I've mapped lava tubes in Hawaii, limestone caves in Kentucky, ice caves in Alaska. I know what natural processes look like, and this isn't it. The Nevada tunnels show clear evidence of intentional design. The question isn't whether they're artificial. The question is, who had the capability to build them, and when? That question becomes even more pressing when you consider the sheer scale of the engineering challenge. Excavating 3,000 kilometers of tunnel through solid rock, much of it granite and basalt, some of the hardest materials on Earth, would require sophisticated boring equipment, enormous energy resources, and a massive workforce. Modern tunnel boring machines can excavate approximately 15 to 20 meters per day under optimal conditions. At that rate, creating 3,000 kilometers of tunnel would take roughly 410 years of continuous operation. And that's using 21st century technology. If these tunnels are truly ancient, if they predate modern civilization, then whoever built them either had technology we can't imagine, or they had timescales we haven't considered, or both. There's also the question of tunnel stability. Rock under pressure tries to collapse. That's why modern tunnels require extensive support systems, steel reinforcement, concrete linings, regular maintenance. Yet the seismic data suggests these tunnels have remained structurally sound for potentially thousands of years. How? Some researchers have proposed that the tunnel walls might have been treated with some kind of stabilizing compound, a sealant or hardening agent that preserved the rock integrity. Others suggest the builders chose their routes with such precision that they avoided unstable rock formations entirely. Either explanation requires geological knowledge far beyond what we typically attribute to ancient peoples. And then there's the most disturbing pattern of all. The tunnel network doesn't stay in Nevada. Seismic surveys conducted in adjacent states, California, Arizona, Utah, Oregon, have detected similar anomalies. Parallel tunnels, consistent dimensions, the same geometric precision. The 3,000-kilometer estimate? That's just Nevada. If the network extends across state lines, and the evidence suggests it does, we could be looking at 5,000 kilometers, maybe 7,000, maybe more. An underground highway system spanning the entire American West, built by unknown hands at an unknown time for an unknown purpose, and sealed away from public knowledge for 70 years. The geometry doesn't lie. The mathematics are clear. These aren't natural caves, and they're not modern military construction. There's something else entirely. Something that challenges every assumption we've made about the technological capabilities of ancient peoples. Something that forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about what else might be hidden beneath our feet. But geometry and mathematics can only tell us what exists. They can't tell us why it's been hidden. For that, we need to look at the documents, the paper trail of suppression, the systematic campaign to ensure this discovery never reached public awareness. And that's where the story gets darker. The 70-year silence. How a discovery this massive stayed hidden. The question everyone asks when they first hear about the Nevada tunnel network is this: how do you hide something 3,000 kilometers long? The answer is surprisingly simple. You don't hide the tunnels themselves. You hide the people who find them. The suppression campaign began in earnest in 1954, 3 years after the first nuclear tests revealed the underground anomalies. A classified memo dated April 12th of that year, declassified in 2008 with heavy redactions, outlines what the government internally called Protocol 7. The document, authored by someone whose name is blacked out, but whose title is listed as Deputy Director, Special Projects Division, reads in part, "Any civilian personnel who encounter evidence of subsurface structural anomalies in the Nevada test site operational area are to be immediately debriefed under national security protocols. All data, recordings, and documentation are to be classified under Atomic Energy Act provisions. Personnel are to be informed that disclosure of findings constitutes a federal offense, punishable by imprisonment." Protocol 7 wasn't about protecting nuclear secrets. It was about protecting the tunnel secret. The mechanism was elegant in its simplicity. Because the tunnels were discovered through nuclear test monitoring, the government could classify everything related to them under atomic weapons secrecy laws. The Atomic Energy Act of 1946 gave federal authorities sweeping powers to restrict information deemed relevant to national security. And the definition of relevant was entirely at their discretion. Dr. Margaret Hollis, a seismologist who worked at the Nevada test site from 1958 to 1962, described the atmosphere in a 1998 interview conducted shortly before her death. "We all knew something strange was down there. The data was unmistakable. But there was this unspoken understanding that you didn't talk about it, not in reports, not in meetings, certainly not outside the facility. People who asked too many questions found themselves reassigned to different projects, or suddenly their security clearances were revoked for administrative reasons. You learned to keep your head down." The few who didn't keep their heads down paid a price. Dr. James McDonald, the atmospheric physicist who tried to publish his findings in 1964, became a cautionary tale. After his paper was rejected by multiple journals citing national security concerns, he attempted to present his research at academic conferences. He was denied speaking slots at 3 separate geology symposiums. When he finally managed to present at a small regional conference in 1966, 2 men in suits attended his presentation and photographed every slide. 6 weeks later, McDonald's research funding was terminated. The University of Arizona informed him that his position was being restructured due to budget constraints. He was offered a teaching-only role with no research obligations. For a scientist of his caliber, it was a professional death sentence. McDonald became increasingly frustrated and vocal about what he saw as systematic suppression of scientific inquiry. He gave interviews to fringe publications. He wrote letters to congressmen. He demanded investigations. In June of 1971, at the age of 51, Dr. James McDonald walked into the desert outside Tucson with a pistol and shot himself. The official cause of death was suicide, resulting from depression. But colleagues who knew him said he'd been receiving threats. His office had been broken into twice in the months before his death. Files were missing. He told friends he was being followed. No investigation was ever conducted beyond the standard police report. McDonald's story became a warning to others in the scientific community. Ask too many questions about Nevada's underground structures, and your career ends. Push too hard, and maybe your life does too. But suppression didn't only target scientists. It targeted anyone who might reveal the secret. Mining companies operating in Nevada discovered early on that certain areas were off-limits, even when geological surveys suggested valuable mineral deposits. When Desert Minerals Corporation broke through into a tunnel in 1987, they weren't just denied access to a potential archaeological site, they were driven out of business. Within 2 years of the incident, Desert Minerals lost its operating permits for violations of environmental regulations that had never been enforced against other companies. Their bank loans were called in. Their insurance premiums skyrocketed. By 1990, the company had declared bankruptcy. Michael Torres, the employee who spoke about what he'd seen, died in that suspicious accident 3 months after his interview was published. The newspaper that published his account received a visit from federal agents who demanded to know Torres's identity and threatened the editor with obstruction of justice charges. The paper's owners, fearing legal costs they couldn't afford, issued a retraction and fired the journalist who wrote the story. The message was clear: speak about the tunnels, and you will be destroyed. Not arrested, not charged with a crime, just methodically dismantled through bureaucratic and financial pressure until you cease to be. This is why so few people came forward for so many decades. The government didn't need to create an elaborate conspiracy. They just needed to make examples of a handful of people and let fear do the rest. But the suppression campaign had a weakness. It was too broad, too aggressive, and too consistent. And that pattern itself became evidence. By the 1990s, researchers studying government secrecy began noticing something odd. There were dozens of cases: geologists losing funding, mining companies losing permits, academic papers being rejected, all centered around the same geographic region, all involving underground discoveries, all met with the same disproportionate response. In 1996, an investigative journalist named Linda Carson started compiling these cases. She'd been researching government suppression of UFO evidence when she stumbled onto the Nevada tunnel story through Dr. Patricia Myers, the geologist whose research had been shut down in 1968. Carson spent 3 years tracking down every scientist, engineer, and worker who'd encountered evidence of the tunnels. Most refused to talk. Some had signed NDAs. Others were simply too frightened. But a few spoke, on condition of anonymity. Carson's research revealed at least 37 separate incidents between 1951 and 1999, where civilian discoveries of underground structures in Nevada were followed by immediate federal intervention. In every case, the discoverers were silenced through some combination of legal threats, economic pressure, or career destruction. Carson attempted to publish her findings as a book. She secured a contract with a mid-sized publisher in 2001. The manuscript was completed. Advanced copies were printed for reviewers. 2 weeks before the scheduled publication date, the publisher canceled the contract, citing legal concerns. Carson's literary agent dropped her. The advanced copies disappeared, allegedly destroyed, though no one could confirm who ordered the destruction or why. Carson's manuscript survives only in fragments, circulated through underground research networks and conspiracy theory forums. Reading it today, even in incomplete form, is a chilling experience. The pattern of suppression she documented is meticulous, systematic, and undeniable. But perhaps the most revealing documents are the ones the government accidentally released. In 2010, a Freedom of Information Act request filed by the Subsurface Archaeology Project yielded a trove of partially declassified memos from the 1960s and 70s. Most were heavily redacted, pages of black bars with only fragments of text visible. But those fragments tell a story. One memo from 1967 discussing a geological survey that had detected anomalous subsurface voids includes this sentence: "Recommend immediate classification of all survey data under Protocol 7 to prevent civilian speculation regarding and potential implications for historical timeline." Another memo from 1972, responding to a request from a university researcher seeking permission to study unusual cave formations near Mercury, Nevada, states, "Request denied. Area contains sensitive, related to, project. Recommend researcher be informed that site has been determined to contain no features of scientific interest." The researcher was lied to. The site did contain features of scientific interest. It was one of the primary access points to the tunnel network. But the most revealing document is a 1979 memo discussing long-term information security protocols. One visible paragraph reads, "The network represents a potential paradigm disruption that could undermine public confidence in established archaeological and historical framework. Continued classification is recommended not due to national security implications, but to prevent premature disclosure of findings that lack adequate contextual explanation." Read that again carefully. The government acknowledged that the tunnels weren't being classified because they threatened national security. They were being classified because they threatened historical narratives, because revealing their existence would undermine public confidence in our understanding of the past. They were hiding the tunnels to protect our worldview, to prevent us from asking questions about who built them and what that means about human history. This is intellectual suppression, not military secrecy, and it's been going on for 70 years. But here's what the architects of the suppression campaign didn't anticipate: the Internet. By the 2000s, leaked documents, whistleblower testimonies, and suppressed research were no longer confined to dusty archives or forgotten filing cabinets. They were being digitized, shared, cross-referenced, and analyzed by independent researchers around the world. The Subsurface Archaeology Project, the Nevada Underground Network, the Desert Anomaly Research Group, dozens of small organizations and individual investigators operating outside traditional academic and government channels began piecing together the evidence. They couldn't be intimidated the way individual scientists could. They couldn't be bankrupted the way mining companies could. They were decentralized, anonymous, and persistent. And slowly, the story began to emerge. Not in major newspapers or academic journals. Those institutions still respected the boundaries of acceptable discourse. But in forums, blogs, podcasts, and self-published reports. In the gray spaces of information exchange, where official narratives lose their power. The government's response has been, rather than directly confronting the growing awareness of the tunnel network, authorities have shifted tactics. They now focus on discrediting anyone who discusses the topic, mixing genuine evidence with deliberate disinformation, planting false leads, encouraging the most extreme and unverifiable theories. It's a classic counterintelligence technique. Poison the well. Make the subject so associated with conspiracy theorists and fringe believers that credible researchers won't touch it. Ensure that anyone who tries to investigate is immediately dismissed as a crank. It's been remarkably effective. Even today, most geologists and archaeologists refuse to discuss the Nevada tunnels publicly. Not because they don't know about the evidence, many do, but because they know what happens to careers when you challenge established paradigms. Dr. Elena Sokolov, a Russian-American geophysicist who analyzed the seismic data in 2018, described the academic culture in a private interview. Everyone knows something is there. The data is too consistent to dismiss, but no one will risk their reputation by saying so publicly. You become radioactive. Journals won't publish you. Conferences won't invite you. Colleagues distance themselves. The evidence doesn't matter if you're labeled a conspiracy theorist, and that label is very easy to apply. This is how you hide a 3,000-kilometer tunnel network in the 21st century. Not through absolute secrecy. That's impossible in the age of satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar. But through strategic discrediting. Through career destruction for those who speak out. Through mixing truth with fiction until the public can't tell the difference. Through making the cost of curiosity higher than most people are willing to pay. And for 70 years, it's worked. But the evidence remains. Buried in declassified documents. Hidden in academic archives. Whispered by dying scientists who finally decide the truth matters more than their reputations. The tunnels exist. The suppression exists. And both raise the same fundamental question. If these tunnels are just ancient caves or abandoned mining projects, why the extreme measures to hide them? What is it about these structures that threatens the established narrative so deeply that careers must be destroyed and evidence must be buried? The answer lies in what the tunnels tell us about their builders, about when they were constructed, and about what that means for everything we think we know about human history. Who built it, and when? The age problem that breaks all models. Dating ancient structures is one of archaeology's most critical and most contentious challenges. When you're dealing with stone, metal, or other inorganic materials, you can't use carbon-14 dating. You need indirect methods, analyzing sediment layers, studying tool marks, examining mineral deposits, correlating with known historical timelines. And when all those methods point to an answer that contradicts everything we believe about human civilization, you have a problem. The Nevada tunnel network is that problem. Let's start with what mainstream archaeology tells us about the peopling of North America. The conventional model, taught in every university and printed in every textbook, goes like this. Humans first arrived in the Americas roughly 15,000 years ago, crossing the Bering Land Bridge from Siberia during the last ice age. These were hunter-gatherers living in small bands, following game animals across the continent. Advanced engineering, sophisticated construction projects, underground infrastructure spanning thousands of kilometers? Not for another 10,000 years, according to the standard timeline. And certainly not in North America, where civilizations like the ancestral Puebloans and Mississippian cultures wouldn't emerge until roughly 1,000 years. So when multiple dating attempts placed the Nevada tunnels at 10,000 to 15,000 years old, or possibly older, it created a paradox that mainstream archaeology simply couldn't accommodate. The first serious dating attempt came in 1974, when a USGS team analyzing core samples near the tunnel network found something unexpected. Calcite formations, mineral deposits created by water seepage, had formed on what appeared to be tunnel walls. Calcite grows slowly, and its layers can be dated using uranium-thorium dating methods. The samples suggested the calcite had been accumulating for at least 12,000 years. That meant the tunnels had to be older than 12,000 years, potentially much older. The USGS team's report was classified immediately. The lead researcher, Dr. Thomas Waverly, was transferred to a project in Alaska. His findings were never published. But a colleague who'd seen the preliminary data before classification spoke about it decades later, in 2007, after retiring from government service. He told an interviewer, "Tom was excited. He kept saying this was going to rewrite the textbooks. He genuinely believed we'd found evidence of a pre-Clovis civilization with engineering capabilities we'd never imagined." Then the report got stamped classified, and he stopped talking about it entirely. When I asked him about it later, he just shook his head and said, "Some doors are better left closed." But the calcite data wasn't the only dating evidence. In 1989, a mining accident near Ely, Nevada, about 250 kilometers northeast of the main Nevada test site, exposed what appeared to be a tunnel entrance. Before federal agents arrived to seal the site, a mine geologist named Robert Chen took photographs and collected rock samples from the tunnel wall. Chen wasn't trying to be a whistleblower. He simply thought he'd discovered an old mining tunnel and wanted to identify the rock type for safety purposes. He sent samples to a private laboratory for analysis. The lab results came back with a note from the technician. These samples show weathering patterns and mineral oxidation consistent with exposure to air and moisture for approximately 8,000 to 10,000 years. Please verify the sample source. These cannot be from recent mining activity. Chen verified the source. The samples were from the tunnel wall he'd photographed. He tried to return to the site to collect more samples, but the entrance had been sealed with concrete and the area declared off-limits by the Bureau of Land Management. His photographs and remaining samples were confiscated when federal agents visited his home 2 weeks later. But Chen had made copies. Those copies circulated through geological circles for years before eventually reaching researchers studying the tunnel network. The weathering patterns in Chen's photographs show something remarkable. The tunnel walls exhibit erosion characteristics consistent with prolonged exposure to air movement and moisture, not the pristine, recently excavated appearance of modern tunnels. These weren't fresh excavations being hidden. They were ancient structures being rediscovered. The age question becomes even more complicated when you examine the tool marks. In the few cases where researchers have glimpsed the tunnel walls before sites were sealed, they've reported something strange. The rock surfaces appear smooth, almost polished, but under close inspection show subtle scoring patterns, parallel grooves approximately 1 to 2 millimeters deep. Dr. Heinrich Müller, the German geophysicist who analyzed the leaked radar data, also examined high-resolution photographs of tunnel walls that surfaced online in 2013. Their origin was never verified, but geological experts confirmed they showed genuine rock formations, not fabricated images. Muller's analysis, published in a small European engineering journal, concluded, The scoring patterns are consistent with mechanical boring, but the groove characteristics don't match any modern tunnel boring machine design. Modern TBMs use rotating disc cutters that create distinctive radial patterns. These grooves are linear and parallel, suggesting a different cutting mechanism, possibly some form of abrasive drilling or thermal excavation. Thermal excavation. That's the process of using intense heat to melt or fracture rock, rather than mechanically crushing it. It's been theorized for decades, but only recently developed for specialized applications. The energy requirements are enormous. If the Nevada tunnels were created using thermal excavation methods 10,000 years ago, it implies a level of technological sophistication that has no place in our understanding of prehistoric cultures. But perhaps the most controversial dating evidence comes from an unexpected source: flood geology. The American West underwent dramatic climate changes at the end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago. Massive glacial lakes formed and catastrophically drained, creating devastating floods that reshaped the landscape. Geological evidence of these floods is visible throughout Nevada, Oregon, and surrounding states. In several locations where seismic data suggests tunnel passages run close to the surface, overlying sediment layers show clear signs of flood deposition dating to this period. What does that mean? It means the tunnels were already there when the floods occurred. They were buried beneath flood sediments 12,000 years ago. Alan Richardson, the geologist who studied cave systems for 3 decades, explained the implications in his 2015 podcast interview. If you have flood deposits from 12,000 years ago sitting on top of tunnel structures, and those structures show no signs of flood damage or sediment intrusion, it means they were already sealed and stable before the floods hit. The builders either anticipated the floods and prepared accordingly, or the tunnels were built so far in advance that they'd already been abandoned and naturally sealed by the time the climate catastrophes occurred. Either scenario is staggering. Option 1. Prehistoric engineers in North America possessed the foresight and geological knowledge to build flood-proof infrastructure 12,000 years ago. Option 2. The tunnels were built even earlier, potentially 15,000, 20,000, or more years ago, at a time when anatomically modern humans had barely spread across the globe, let alone developed advanced civilizations. Both options contradict established archaeological timelines. Both options suggest we're missing enormous chapters of human history. And both options explain why the evidence has been suppressed so aggressively. But let's consider an even more unsettling possibility, one that some researchers have proposed based on the geological evidence. What if the tunnels weren't built by humans at all? Before you dismiss this as fringe speculation, consider what we actually know. We know the tunnels exhibit engineering principles. We know they're precisely constructed. We know they're ancient, potentially older than any known human civilization in North America. We don't know who built them because we've never found artifacts, inscriptions, or remains associated with the construction. The tunnels are anonymous. Dr. Patricia Myers, the geologist whose research was shut down in 1968, raised this question in a 1996 interview. People assume these must be human-made because they're engineered, but engineering implies intelligence, not necessarily human intelligence. If you found a perfectly straight tunnel on Mars, you wouldn't assume humans built it. You'd say, something intelligent was here. we should apply the same logic to Earth. If these tunnels predate known human civilization in this region, we should at least consider that the builders might not have been human, or might have been human, but from a civilization we haven't discovered yet. The phrase, "a civilization we haven't discovered yet," is doing a lot of work in that statement. Because if there was an advanced prehistoric civilization in North America, one capable of building 3,000-kilometer tunnel networks, where's the evidence? Where are the cities, the pottery, the tools, the burials? This is the central paradox of the Nevada tunnels. They're too sophisticated to be natural, too old to fit human timelines, and too devoid of cultural artifacts to identify their builders. Some researchers have proposed that the tunnels might be the work of the so-called lost civilization theorists like Graham Hancock have written about, a globally advanced culture that existed before the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe 12,800 years ago, and was largely wiped out, leaving only scattered megalithic monuments and mysterious structures. The evidence for such a civilization is hotly debated, but the Nevada tunnels would fit the profile. Highly sophisticated engineering, built before the climate catastrophe, potentially abandoned or destroyed when the civilization collapsed. Other researchers point to Native American oral traditions. Many indigenous peoples of the American Southwest have stories about the Old Ones, or the ancient people who lived. The Hopi speak of emergence from previous worlds through tunnels in the earth. The Paiute of Nevada have legends of tunnels used by giant ancestors. Mainstream archaeology typically treats these stories as mythology, symbolic narratives, not literal history. But what if they're both? What if the oral traditions preserve actual memories of encountering these tunnel networks, filtered through generations of retelling and cultural interpretation? Dr. Angela Whitehorse, a Native American anthropologist of Navajo and Hopi descent, wrote in a 2012 paper, "Western archaeology has a troubling habit of dismissing indigenous oral traditions as fantasy, then being shocked when archaeological evidence confirms what our stories have said all along. If my elders tell me there are ancient tunnels beneath the desert built by people who came before us, I don't need a government survey to believe them. I need the government to stop hiding the proof." Whitehorse's paper was rejected by 3 academic journals before being published in a small indigenous studies publication. She received informal warnings that her career in mainstream archaeology would suffer if she continued mixing tribal mythology with scientific research. The pattern repeats. Evidence that challenges the paradigm is suppressed, regardless of its source. But here's what we can say with reasonable confidence based on the available evidence. The Nevada tunnel network is at least 10,000 years old, possibly significantly older. It was built with engineering precision that suggests advanced planning and sophisticated tools. Its construction would have required enormous resources, coordinated labor, and geological expertise. And no known culture in North America at that time possessed those capabilities. Not according to the textbooks, not according to the established timeline, not according to everything we've been taught about human development. So either our timeline is wrong, or our understanding of prehistoric capabilities is wrong, or there's a missing chapter of human history that archaeology has failed to discover. Or all three. The age of the Nevada tunnels, isn't just an academic question about dates and carbon measurements. It's a fundamental challenge to our narrative of human progress, the story we tell ourselves about how civilization developed, where it began, and what ancient peoples were capable of. And that's why the evidence has been buried. Because accepting the evidence means admitting we don't know our own history. It means acknowledging that sophisticated civilizations might have risen and fallen long before Sumer, before Egypt, before the megalith builders of Europe. It means facing the possibility that we're not the first advanced culture on this planet, and we might not be the last. But who were they? These mysterious builders who carved highways through solid rock thousands of years before the wheel was invented, before copper tools were forged, before agriculture transformed human society. To answer that question, we need to look at what little physical evidence exists. We need to go inside the tunnels. Inside the tunnels. What the few explorers actually found. The truth about what lies inside the Nevada tunnel network is fragmented, incomplete, and maddeningly difficult to verify. Unlike the seismic data and geological surveys, which leave paper trails even when classified, first-hand accounts of tunnel exploration exist mostly as rumors, leaked testimonies, and deathbed confessions. But patterns emerge when you compile these fragments. And those patterns suggest something far stranger than abandoned mining shafts or natural cave systems. The first confirmed human entry into the tunnel network, at least in modern times, occurred in August of 1963. A geological survey team drilling exploratory boreholes near Yucca Flat, deep within the Nevada test site, punched through into a void at a depth of 73 meters. The drill rig operator, a man named Dennis Kowalski, described what happened next in an interview recorded in 1997, 3 years before his death. The bit just dropped. No resistance, like we'd hit empty space. We pulled it up and looked down the hole with a flashlight. You could see the bottom, solid floor, smooth as concrete. We radioed the supervisor. He came out, looked down the hole, and his face went white. He told us to pack up immediately. Said we'd drilled into a classified structure. We were off the site within an hour. Within 24 hours, a military engineering team had arrived to seal the borehole. But during that brief window, someone made a decision that would later prove significant. They sent a man down. According to documents that surfaced through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2011, documents so heavily redacted they're nearly useless, a security assessment team was lowered into the tunnel to determine if the breach posed any risk to test site operations. The report itself is almost entirely blacked out, but one paragraph remains visible. Interior examination confirms artificial construction. Walls exhibit uniform dimensions and consistent surface treatment. No structural instability detected. No evidence of recent habitation or activity. Recommend sealing breach and classifying location under Protocol 7. Artificial construction. Those two words, in an official government document, confirm what the seismic data had been suggesting for years. But what did that security assessment team actually see? We know because one of them talked. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrington, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, was part of that 1963. He maintained his silence for 42 years, bound by security oaths and the very real threat of prosecution. But in 2005, dying of lung cancer in a VA hospital, he gave a recorded interview to his grandson, a history student at UCLA. That recording was later shared with researchers investigating the tunnel network. Harrington's testimony is chilling in its matter-of-factness. They lowered 3 of us down on ropes, about 25 meters. When we hit bottom, we were in a tunnel maybe 4 meters wide and 3 meters high. The walls were smooth, not rough-hewn like a mine shaft. Smooth like they'd been machined. There was no debris, no tool marks you could see, no support beams, just solid rock shaped into a perfect corridor. We had powerful flashlights, but they only penetrated about 30 meters in either direction before the darkness just swallowed the light. There was air movement, a breeze coming from somewhere deeper in the system. It smelled stale, but not foul, just old. The floor was covered in maybe 2 centimeters of fine dust. We walked about 50 meters in one direction, and I noticed something that bothered me. Our footprints were the only marks in that dust. If anyone had been down there recently, or even in the last few decades, there would have been some sign. But this tunnel looked like it hadn't been disturbed in centuries. Then we found the chamber. Harrington's account of the chamber is the most detailed description we have of the tunnel network's interior features. He described a roughly circular room, approximately 15 meters in diameter, with a domed ceiling that rose to about 8 meters at its center. The walls showed the same smooth, machined appearance as the tunnels. But what struck him most was what the chamber contained. Nothing. No artifacts. No inscriptions. No evidence of what the space had been used for. Just empty, engineered space, preserved in darkness for unknowable centuries. It felt wrong, Harrington said in the recording. Not dangerous, just wrong. Like we'd broken into a tomb that had been sealed for so long that even the ghosts had left. We spent maybe 20 minutes down there total. Took some photographs. I don't know what happened to those. Collected a few rock samples. Then they pulled us out and sealed the hole with concrete. I never went back. Never wanted to. When asked why he'd waited so long to speak about the experience, Harrington's response was simple. Because no one would have believed me. And because I saw what happened to people who talked about things the government wanted kept quiet. I had a family, a career. I chose silence. But now I'm dying, and I figure the truth matters more than whatever they can do to a dead man. Harrington's testimony corroborates what other fragmentary accounts have suggested. The tunnels are empty. Deliberately, almost obsessively empty. This raises a crucial question. If the builders went to such extraordinary effort to create this network, why leave no trace of their presence? No tools, no waste, no cultural artifacts. Some researchers argue this suggests a level of organizational discipline we don't associate with ancient peoples. Everything was removed. Everything was cleaned. The tunnels were either abandoned in an orderly fashion, or they were never meant to contain anything permanent in the first place. Others suggest a darker possibility, that whatever was in the tunnels was removed deliberately in modern times, before civilian researchers could access them. The 1987 Desert Minerals Corporation breakthrough offers another piece of the puzzle. Michael Torres, the mining employee who witnessed the breakthrough before being silenced, described the tunnel interior during his brief observation period. The walls were smooth, yeah, But up close you could see these faint lines, like striations running horizontally along the length of the. They were maybe a millimeter deep, perfectly parallel, spaced about 5 centimeters apart. I'm a miner. I've worked in tunnels my whole life. I've never seen anything like it. It looked almost decorative, but too regular to be decoration. More like structural reinforcement? I don't know. But it was deliberate. Torres's description of horizontal striations has been corroborated by at least 2 other accounts from people who briefly glimpsed tunnel interiors before sites were sealed. What could cause such patterns? Dr. Heinrich Müller, analyzing the descriptions, proposed they might be the result of a segmented boring process where the excavation tool advanced in stages, leaving subtle marks at regular intervals. But that would require extraordinarily precise control and consistency over thousands of kilometers. Another possibility, raised by materials engineers, is that the striations served a structural purpose, creating a slightly corrugated surface that distributes stress more effectively than a perfectly smooth wall. If true, that implies the builders understood structural mechanics at a sophisticated level. But perhaps the most intriguing testimony comes from a source that's impossible to fully verify, yet aligns disturbingly well with other fragmentary evidence. In 2009, an anonymous letter was sent to several researchers investigating the tunnel network. The letter claimed to be from a former Department of Energy contractor who'd worked on classified underground projects in Nevada during the 1980s. The letter described an incident in which a deep drilling project accidentally intersected a tunnel at a depth of 147 meters. The writer claimed to have been part of a covert exploration team that spent 3 days mapping the accessible portions of the tunnel before the entrance was sealed. Most researchers dismissed the letter as a hoax. The details seemed too dramatic, too convenient. But then, in 2014, a second letter arrived. This one from a different anonymous source, claiming to be a different member of the same exploration team. The letter provided specific technical details about the drilling project, including equipment serial numbers and project codes that were later verified through declassified DOE records. The second letter corroborated the first account almost exactly. According to these sources, the exploration team mapped approximately 12 kilometers of tunnel system over 3 days. They documented multiple chambers similar to the one Harrington described, empty, smooth-walled, showing no signs of recent use. But they also found something else: ventilation shafts. The letter describes vertical passages, roughly 1 meter in diameter, rising at precise angles from the main tunnels toward the surface. The team followed one shaft upward for 37 meters before it became too narrow to safely continue. When they returned to the surface and attempted to locate where the ventilation shaft should have emerged, they found nothing. No opening, no surface feature. The shaft apparently terminated beneath the desert floor, either deliberately sealed or naturally filled with sediment over millennia. But the existence of ventilation shafts answers a critical question. How could anyone work in these tunnels during construction? Excavating rock generates enormous amounts of dust and requires substantial air circulation. The builders clearly understood this and incorporated ventilation into their design. This isn't primitive cave dwelling. This is infrastructure planning. The letters also describe something that both sources emphasized. The tunnels were clean. Not just empty, clean. No rockfall, no sediment accumulation beyond a thin layer of fine dust, no evidence of water damage or structural collapse. The tunnels appeared to be in nearly the same condition as when they were built, despite their extraordinary age. One letter stated, "It was like walking through a facility that had been maintained and then abandoned yesterday, except the dust on the floor suggested no one had been there for thousands of years." How does that happen? How do tunnels carved through rock remain structurally sound for 10,000 years without maintenance? Modern tunnels require constant upkeep. Rock shifts, water seeps, ceilings collapse. Yet these ancient passages show none of that deterioration. Some researchers have proposed that the tunnel walls were treated with some form of mineral sealant, a compound that hardened the rock and prevented erosion. Others suggest the builders chose their routes with such precision that they avoided geological stress points entirely. Either explanation requires knowledge and technology far beyond what we attribute to prehistoric peoples. But the most disturbing aspect of these exploration accounts isn't what was found. It's what happened to the explorers afterward. Lieutenant Colonel Harrington maintained his silence until he was dying. Michael Torres died in a suspicious accident. The anonymous letter writers have never revealed their identities, presumably because they fear the consequences. And the official exploration reports, the photographs, the rock samples, the detailed surveys, have all been classified or destroyed. Every time someone gets inside these tunnels and documents what they find, the evidence vanishes. In 2003, a team of spelunkers accidentally discovered what they believed was a natural cave entrance in a remote area of Lincoln County, Nevada. They explored approximately 2 kilometers of passages before realizing the walls were too uniform to be natural. They took hundreds of photographs, collected rock samples, measured dimensions, documented everything with scientific precision. They posted their findings online, excited to share what they thought was an archaeological discovery. Within 72 hours, their website was taken down. Their photos were scrubbed from image hosting sites, and all 4 team members received visits from federal agents who confiscated their equipment, samples, and personal computers. The agents invoked the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, claiming the team had illegally disturbed a protected site. The spelunkers were threatened with federal charges if they discussed their findings publicly. One team member, posting anonymously years later, wrote, "They didn't just take our evidence, they took our backups, our memory cards, even our personal photos that had nothing to do with the caves. They wanted to make sure nothing survived. And they made it very clear that if we ever talked about what we saw, our lives would become very difficult." This is the pattern: exploration, discovery, documentation, suppression, over and over again for 70 years. And with each suppression, the question becomes more urgent. What is down there that justifies this level of secrecy? If the tunnels are just empty corridors and bare chambers, why the fear of public knowledge? Unless they're not empty everywhere. Unless there are parts of the tunnel network that haven't been described in the leaked testimonies and anonymous letters. Parts that remain classified not because of their age or their engineering, but because of what they contain. Lieutenant Colonel Harrington, in that hospital room recording, said something near the end that his grandson almost didn't include when he shared the tape. "They asked me if I'd seen anything unusual, anything that didn't belong. I told them no. That was true. We hadn't seen any artifacts or inscriptions or anything like that. But there was something I didn't mention in my official report. Something I wasn't sure how to explain. In the chamber, on the far wall, there was a section maybe 2 meters across where the surface looked different. Like the rock had been altered somehow, or replaced with a different material. I walked over to touch it, and one of the other guys grabbed my arm, said we didn't have time to investigate everything. We needed to get out. I've thought about that dark section on the wall for 40 years. About what it might have been. A doorway, a sealed passage, something decorative. Or maybe it was just a natural variation in the rock. But I don't think so. I think it was something intentional. Something the builders put there. And I think there are things in those tunnels that we didn't find because we didn't look long enough. Things that are still there, waiting. Waiting for what? Waiting for whom? And why have 70 years of suppression ensured that no one has been allowed to find out? The interior of the Nevada tunnel network remains largely unexplored and almost entirely undocumented. What little we know comes from brief glimpses, hasty surveys, and testimonies given under the shadow of government intimidation. But those glimpses reveal enough to know this isn't just an archaeological curiosity. It's a challenge to everything we think we understand about ancient capabilities, about the history of North America, and about who might have walked these corridors in the deep past. The tunnels are empty now, but they weren't always. Someone built them, someone used them, and someone decided to hide the evidence of their existence from the modern world. The question is, why? The network's purpose: transportation, refuge, or something else? Engineering projects on the scale of the Nevada tunnel network don't happen by accident. They require vision, planning, enormous resources, and, most critically, a compelling purpose. Ancient peoples didn't carve 3,000 kilometers of precisely engineered tunnels through solid rock because they were bored. They did it because they needed to do what? The purpose question has haunted researchers since the tunnels were first discovered, and the answers proposed over the decades range from practical to speculative to genuinely unsettling. Let's start with the most straightforward theory: transportation. The tunnel network's layout, with its primary arteries, secondary branches, and connecting corridors, resembles nothing so much as a highway system. The gentle downward grades facilitate movement. The consistent dimensions allow for predictable travel. The chambers could serve as rest stops or supply depots. If you were designing an underground transportation system to move people and goods across vast distances while avoiding surface hazards, you'd design something very similar to what exists beneath Nevada. But transportation for what kind of society? Dr. Sarah Chen, the civil engineer who analyzed the tunnel layout, calculated that a network of this scale could support a population of several 100,000 people if used continuously. The volume of traffic would be substantial: caravans moving resources, travelers journeying between distant settlements, trade goods flowing along established routes. Yet we have no archaeological evidence of such a population in prehistoric Nevada. No cities, no agricultural centers, no evidence of the kind of complex society that would require or could build this infrastructure. It's possible the population centers existed but have been lost to time, buried beneath millennia of geological change. The American Southwest has undergone dramatic environmental shifts. Lakes have dried, rivers have changed course, entire landscapes have been reshaped. But it's also possible we're thinking about this wrong. What if the tunnels weren't designed for continuous daily use by a large population? What if they served a different function, one that required massive infrastructure but only intermittent use? That brings us to the second theory: Several researchers have proposed that the tunnel network was built as a survival shelter, a place to retreat during periods of extreme surface danger. The timing is suggestive. If the tunnels date to 10,000 or 15,000 years ago, they were constructed during or shortly after the Younger Dryas, a period of rapid, catastrophic climate change that saw temperatures plummet, megafauna extinctions, and widespread environmental upheaval. Some geologists believe the Younger Dryas was triggered by a comet impact or airburst over North America. The evidence includes a widespread layer of microscopic diamonds, magnetic spherules, and other markers of extreme heat found in sediment layers dating to 12,800 years ago. If a cosmic impact did occur, the surface would have been devastated. Firestorms, tsunamis, catastrophic flooding as ice sheets collapsed, prolonged nuclear winter conditions. Underground tunnels, deep enough to protect from surface radiation and temperature extremes, would have been one of the few places humans could survive. Dr. Alan Richardson, the cave systems specialist, explored this possibility in an unpublished paper he shared with colleagues. If you knew a catastrophe was coming, whether through astronomical observation, geological signs, or ancestral knowledge, and you had the capability, you'd build underground refuges. The Nevada tunnels would have provided protection from surface conditions, access to geothermal heat, and potentially connection to underground water sources. A population could survive for years, even decades, in such a system. The tunnel network's ventilation shafts support this theory. They'd allow air circulation without exposing inhabitants to surface conditions. The chambers could serve as living quarters, food storage, or communal spaces. But there's a problem with the refuge theory. If the tunnels were built as emergency shelters, where are the artifacts? Where's the evidence of habitation? The few exploration accounts we have describe empty corridors and bare chambers. No pottery shards, no tool debris, no hearths or food remains. Nothing to suggest people lived in these spaces, even temporarily. Either the builders cleaned up with obsessive thoroughness before abandoning the tunnels, or the tunnels weren't used for long-term habitation. Which brings us to more speculative theories. Some researchers have proposed that the tunnel network wasn't built for humans at all, at least not primarily. The consistent dimensions, the precise engineering, the lack of side passages or irregular features, all of this suggests the tunnels were designed for something specific. Something that required standardized dimensions and predictable routes. Dr. Patricia Myers, in her 1996 interview, raised this possibility. What if the tunnels were built for moving something other than people? Water, perhaps? Or materials? The ancient Romans built aqueducts spanning hundreds of kilometers to transport water. Is it so impossible that a prehistoric civilization built underground conduits for the same purpose? The tunnel network's layout does connect to water sources. Multiple seismic surveys have detected the tunnels passing near underground aquifers, springs, and ancient lake beds. If the tunnels were designed as a water distribution system, it would explain several mysteries. The consistent downward grades that facilitate flow, the large chambers that could serve as reservoirs or pumping stations, the ventilation shafts that could prevent pressure buildup. But it raises new questions. Why underground? Surface aqueducts would have been easier to build and maintain. And what civilization needed to move water across 3,000 kilometers of desert? Unless the surface wasn't a desert when the tunnels were built. Climate reconstructions suggest that Nevada was much wetter during the late Pleistocene. Lakes covered areas that are now bone-dry playas. Rivers flowed year-round. The landscape supported forests and grasslands, where today there's only scrub and sand. A wetter climate would have supported larger populations and made surface transportation easier, making underground tunnels seem less necessary, not more. So why build them? Dr. Elena Sokolov, the Russian-American geophysicist, proposed what she called the strategic placement theory in a 2018 analysis. She noted that the tunnel network's major hubs, the areas where multiple passages intersect, align suspiciously well with significant geological features, major fault lines, volcanic formations, and areas of high geothermal activity. This isn't random, Sokolov argued. The builders deliberately positioned key sections of the network at geologically active sites. Either they were exploiting geothermal energy for heating and ventilation, or they were monitoring seismic activity, or both. This suggests a civilization with advanced geological knowledge and a long-term investment in understanding Earth's dynamic processes. If Sokolov is right, the tunnels might have been part of a continent-scale monitoring system, an ancient equivalent of modern seismic networks, designed to track earthquake activity, volcanic eruptions, and other geological events. That would explain why the network extends so far. You can't monitor an entire tectonic plate from one location. You need distributed sensors, or in this case, distributed access points to deep geological formations. But monitoring requires observers. Where's the evidence of the civilization that operated this system? This is where some researchers venture into territory that mainstream archaeology refuses to engage with. They point to the Native American oral traditions Angela Whitehorse referenced, stories of the old ones who lived underground, who had knowledge of the Earth's rhythms, who disappeared long before current tribes emerged. They point to global myths of antediluvian civilizations, the Atlantis legends, the stories of pre-flood kings in Sumerian texts, the Chinese tales of the Yellow Emperor's underground palaces. They suggest that the Nevada tunnels might be remnants of a worldwide prehistoric civilization that left traces in myth and scattered megalithic monuments, but was largely erased by the Younger Dryas catastrophe. And they note something disturbing. The tunnel network doesn't end at Nevada's borders. Seismic anomalies consistent with the Nevada tunnels have been detected in California, Arizona, Utah, Oregon, and Idaho. The pattern extends across the entire western United States and possibly beyond. If these anomalies represent a connected system, and the evidence suggests they might, we're not talking about 3,000 kilometers. We're talking about 5,000, 7,000, maybe 10,000 kilometers. An underground network spanning half a continent. Who could build such a thing, and why? The official answer, from the few government sources that acknowledge the tunnels at all, is that they're natural lava tubes, misidentified by over-eager researchers who don't understand geology. But that answer collapses under scrutiny. Lava tubes don't maintain consistent dimensions. They don't form parallel networks. They don't include ventilation shafts and engineered chambers. The tunnels are artificial. That's not speculation. That's documented fact, acknowledged in classified reports and confirmed by every researcher who's examined the evidence. So if they're artificial, we return to the fundamental question. What were they for? In 2016, a group of independent researchers compiled every available piece of evidence about the tunnel network. Seismic data, exploration accounts, geological surveys, Native American oral traditions, and attempted to synthesize a comprehensive theory. Their conclusion, published in a self-funded report called The Nevada Underground, a Preliminary Analysis, proposed what they called the multi-purpose hypothesis. The tunnels, they argued, weren't designed for a single function. They were infrastructure, versatile, adaptable, capable of serving multiple needs across centuries or millennia. During peaceful times, they might have served as trade routes, connecting distant communities and facilitating commerce. During conflicts, they could have been military corridors, allowing rapid troop movement and protected supply lines. During climate crises, they transformed into refuges, sheltering populations from surface catastrophes. And through all these uses, they served as monuments to the builder's engineering prowess, statements of capability and permanence. This multi-purpose hypothesis has the advantage of explaining why the tunnels seem simultaneously over-engineered for simple transportation and underutilized as permanent habitations. They weren't designed to serve one need. They were designed to serve whatever needs arose over their operational lifetime. But it also requires us to accept something profound and unsettling. It requires us to accept that a prehistoric civilization, one that left virtually no trace in the archaeological record, possessed the organizational capacity, technical knowledge, and long-term planning ability to undertake one of the largest construction projects in human history. A civilization that understood geology well enough to route tunnels through stable rock formation, that possessed excavation technology capable of boring through granite, that could coordinate labor across generations to complete a project spanning thousands of kilometers. A civilization that, according to everything we've been taught, did not exist. Dr. Angela Whitehorse, writing in her 2012 paper, put it plainly. The Nevada tunnels force us to choose between two uncomfortable options. Either we've fundamentally misunderstood the capabilities of prehistoric peoples, in which case we need to rewrite our entire understanding of human development, or there's a lost chapter of advanced civilization that archaeology has failed to discover. Either way, the implications are staggering. And either way, we can't ignore the evidence just because it doesn't fit our current models. But ignoring the evidence is exactly what has happened. For 70 years, the tunnel network has been classified, suppressed, and denied. Researchers who've tried to investigate have been silenced. Evidence has been confiscated. The story has been buried as thoroughly as the tunnels themselves. And that suppression suggests something important. The authorities who've maintained this cover-up aren't just protecting archaeological curiosities. They're protecting the narrative, the official story of human history, the carefully constructed timeline that places civilization's origins in Mesopotamia 6,000 years ago and depicts prehistoric peoples as primitive hunter-gatherers. The Nevada tunnels threaten that narrative. They suggest that civilization is older than we've acknowledged, that technological sophistication existed long before we're willing to admit, that the story of human progress is far more complex and far stranger than the textbooks describe. But there's another possibility, one that few researchers are willing to discuss publicly, but that lurks in the background of every conversation about these. What if the suppression isn't about protecting historical narratives? What if it's about protecting current operations? What if the government has been using the tunnel network for the past 70 years? That possibility, that these ancient structures have been repurposed for modern classified projects, would explain the extreme secrecy, the aggressive suppression of civilian research, and the classified status that has never been lifted, despite the decades-old nature of the discovery. It would explain why exploration accounts describe some tunnels as pristine and empty, while others show signs of recent activity: sealed entrances, concrete barriers, areas marked as restricted. And it would mean that somewhere beneath the Nevada desert, ancient engineering and modern secrets have merged into something the public is not allowed to know. We'll explore that possibility in the next chapter, because the cover-up isn't just historical, it's ongoing. What they're still hiding. The active cover-up continues. The story of the Nevada Tunnel Network could have ended decades ago. A Cold War curiosity discovered during nuclear testing, classified for national security reasons, and gradually forgotten as the weapons programs wound down and new generations of bureaucrats took over. But it didn't end. The suppression continues today, in 2026, with the same intensity, arguably more, as it did in the 1950s. Which raises an obvious question. Why? If these are just ancient archaeological structures, relics of a prehistoric civilization with no relevance to modern security concerns, why maintain aggressive suppression 70 years after their discovery? The answer, pieced together from recent incidents, leaked documents, and pattern analysis, suggests something deeply troubling. The tunnels aren't just being hidden, they're being used. Let's start with what happened in 2000. On March 14th of that year, seismometers across Nevada and eastern California registered an unusual event: a sustained low-frequency vibration lasting approximately 11 minutes. The signature didn't match an earthquake. It didn't match a nuclear test. It didn't match any natural geological process. Dr. Marcus Webb, a seismologist at the University of Nevada, Reno, was analyzing the data when he noticed something odd. The vibration originated from multiple points simultaneously. 7 distinct locations spread across southern Nevada, all at depths between 80 and 120 meters. The same depth range as the tunnel network. Webb compiled his findings and prepared to publish a preliminary analysis, noting the unusual multi-point origin and suggesting possible explanations: underground construction, controlled explosions for mining, or unknown industrial activity. Before he could submit the paper, he received a phone call from someone identifying himself as a Department of Energy security officer. The caller asked Webb to delay publication pending a routine security review of data collected near federal facilities. Webb agreed to a 2-week delay. That was 3 years ago. His paper has never been published. When contacted by colleagues asking about his findings, Webb declines to discuss them, citing ongoing security considerations. But copies of his preliminary data circulated before he was silenced. And independent researchers analyzing that data came to a disturbing conclusion. The seismic signature was consistent with large volumes of air moving through enclosed spaces, like ventilation systems operating in underground tunnels. Someone had activated machinery in the tunnel network. In March of 2021, 70 years after the tunnels were discovered, 10,000 years after they were supposedly built, this wasn't the first such incident. It was simply the first one that generated enough public data to be analyzed before suppression kicked in. In November of 2017, residents near Rachel, Nevada, the small town adjacent to Area 51, reported unusual vibrations felt through the ground. Not earthquakes, not sonic booms from aircraft. Something different. A low, thrumming sensation that lasted for hours. Local news covered the story briefly. Residents speculated about secret military tests at nearby Groom Lake. Then, federal agents visited the news station and requested that the story not be pursued further, citing national security concerns. The station complied. The vibrations were never explained. But Rachel sits directly above one of the major tunnel arteries identified in seismic surveys from the 1970s. In August of 2019, a team of recreational cavers exploring BLM land in Lincoln County stumbled upon what they initially thought was an abandoned mine shaft. The entrance had been recently cleared, disturbed earth, fresh tool marks on surrounding rocks. They entered approximately 50 meters before encountering a steel gate with electronic locks. Modern security infrastructure in what should have been a century-old mining tunnel. They photographed the gate and left, intending to report their find to the Bureau of Land Management as a possible safety hazard or unauthorized mining operation. Within 48 hours of posting their photos to a caving forum, they received a visit from federal agents who confiscated their cameras, GPS units, and computers. They were told the area was restricted due to unexploded ordnance from historical military activities, and that they'd committed a federal trespass violation. Charges were never filed, but the cavers were required to sign documents acknowledging that they'd violated federal law and agreeing never to return to the area or discuss what they'd found. One of the cavers, posting anonymously years later, wrote, "The thing that bothered me most wasn't the confiscation or the threats. It was how fast they responded. We found that gate on a Saturday afternoon. Federal agents were at my door Monday morning. That means they were monitoring something. They knew we'd been there almost immediately." Electronic surveillance in a supposedly abandoned ancient tunnel system. These incidents, scattered across the past decade, paint a picture of active operations in the tunnel network. Modern security, electronic monitoring, ventilation systems, restricted access enforced through intimidation and prosecution. Someone is down there, and they don't want anyone to know. The question is, what are they doing? One possibility, raised by researchers tracking military black budget programs, is that the tunnels have been repurposed as classified storage or transportation infrastructure. The United States military operates numerous underground facilities: NORAD's Cheyenne Mountain Complex, the Raven Rock Mountain Complex, various weapons storage sites. Using existing tunnel networks for similar purposes would save enormous construction costs and provide ready-made infrastructure with the added benefit of prehistoric construction that predates any satellite surveillance or geologic mapping. Transporting classified materials between facilities through underground tunnels would eliminate aerial detection risks. Storing sensitive equipment or documents in chambers hundreds of meters underground would provide protection from both physical attacks and electronic surveillance. But if that's all it was, simple utilization of convenient underground space, why the extreme suppression of archaeological research? Military facilities are classified. Their locations are protected. But the government doesn't typically confiscate the research of civilian geologists who accidentally discovered the existence of underground storage bunkers. The level of suppression suggests they're protecting something more sensitive than the mere existence of classified facilities. Dr. Sarah Chin, analyzing the pattern of suppression incidents, noted something significant. The government's response isn't consistent with protecting classified military installations. It's consistent with protecting classified research programs. The difference matters. If you're just hiding a storage facility, you can acknowledge the tunnel's existence while restricting access. But if you're conducting research that depends on specific properties of the tunnels, their age, their construction methods, their anomalous characteristics, then you need to suppress all civilian research that might inadvertently reveal what you're studying. What kind of research would require that level of secrecy? Some researchers have proposed that the government is attempting to understand the construction methods used by the tunnel builders, trying to reverse engineer prehistoric technology that might have applications for modern engineering. If the tunnels were indeed created using some form of advanced boring technique, thermal excavation, sound-based rock fracturing, or other methods we don't fully understand, replicating that technology would have enormous commercial and military value. Imagine being able to excavate tunnels at a fraction of current costs, with greater precision and less environmental impact. Imagine underground transportation systems, military bases, or storage facilities that could be built in months rather than years. That technology would be worth protecting, worth classifying, worth ensuring that no independent researchers stumbled onto evidence that might reveal the principles involved. But there's an even more unsettling possibility. What if the research isn't about replicating the tunnels? What if it's about what the tunnels connect to? Lieutenant Colonel Harrington, in his deathbed testimony, mentioned that dark section on the chamber wall, the area that looked different, like it might be a sealed doorway or passage. What if there are sections of the tunnel network that haven't been accessed? Sealed chambers or deeper levels that the original builders closed off? And what if the modern exploration of the tunnels isn't about utilizing existing infrastructure, but about reaching whatever lies beyond those sealed sections? This is where evidence becomes fragmentary and speculation begins. But the speculation is grounded in documented patterns. In 2015, a Defense Department budget document leaked online before being quickly scrubbed. The document included line items for a project codenamed Deep Reach, a classified research program operating under the Department of Energy with substantial funding, $370 million over 5 years. The project description was minimal. Advanced subsurface exploration and recovery operations in support of national security objectives. Subsurface exploration. In Nevada. Under Department of Energy jurisdiction, the same agency that manages the Nevada test site and has been the primary federal authority involved in tunnel suppression since the 1950s. Independent researchers attempting to trace Deep Reach funding hit dead ends. The project exists in budget documents but has no public profile, no disclosed location, and no published results. It's a ghost program, funded, active, and completely hidden from oversight. One researcher, analyzing the budget patterns, noted that Deep Reach funding began in 2012, the same year that ground-penetrating radar satellites were first deployed with sufficient resolution to detect subsurface voids from orbit. Is that coincidence? Or did satellite detection of previously unknown tunnel sections trigger renewed exploration efforts? In 2018, an investigative journalist named Marcus Freeman began researching classified underground projects in Nevada. He'd obtained fragments of internal DOE communications through confidential sources, emails discussing structural assessments, access protocols, and containment procedures related to unnamed subsurface sites. Freeman was preparing an exposé when he received what he described as the most terrifying phone call of my life. The caller didn't identify himself. He simply said, "We know what you're working on. We know who you've been talking to. Stop. This isn't a negotiation. This isn't a threat. This is information. If you publish, you'll be charged with violating the Espionage Act. You'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison. Your sources will be identified and prosecuted. Walk away." The call ended. Freeman consulted with attorneys who specialized in First Amendment issues. They told him that Espionage Act prosecutions of journalists were rare but not impossible, especially since the 2010 era of aggressive leak prosecutions. They couldn't guarantee he'd be protected. Freeman made the hardest decision of his career. He destroyed his notes, deleted his files, and walked away from the story. In a private conversation years later, he told a colleague, "They were serious. I've covered wars, cartels, corrupt politicians. I know when someone is bluffing and when they're stating facts. This was facts. Whatever they're doing in those tunnels, they'll destroy lives to protect it. And I decided my life and freedom were worth more than one story." This is the nature of the ongoing cover-up. Not dramatic conspiracies with shadowy assassins, just methodical, bureaucratic destruction of anyone who gets too close to the truth. Legal threats, career annihilation, economic pressure. And for those who persist despite the warnings, accidents, suicides, disappearances that are never adequately investigated. The pattern is consistent enough to be undeniable, but diffuse enough to avoid triggering sustained media attention or congressional oversight. And it continues, year after year, protecting a secret that grows more significant the longer it's maintained. Because every year of suppression is evidence that whatever is happening in those tunnels remains active, remains classified, and remains too sensitive to acknowledge. The satellite imagery evidence is particularly revealing. Since 2010, independent researchers have been analyzing publicly available satellite data of southern Nevada, looking for surface features that might indicate tunnel entrances or ventilation shafts. What they've found is a pattern of small, isolated structures in remote desert areas, concrete pads, small buildings, fenced compounds with no apparent purpose. No power lines, no roads, no visible activity. But when these sites are cross-referenced with seismic data showing tunnel locations, the correlation is striking. These isolated structures sit directly above known tunnel passages or chambers. They're access points, monitoring stations, entry facilities for classified exploration, and they're being maintained. Satellite imagery from different years shows the same structures, sometimes with new fencing or additional buildings. This isn't archaeological preservation. This is active infrastructure. In 2023, a drone operator flying in BLM land near Tonopah captured footage of one of these isolated structures. The video shows a small concrete building with a steel door surrounded by chain-link fence topped with razor wire. A warning sign is visible. U.S. government property, no trespassing. Use of deadly force authorized. The video was posted online briefly before being removed, allegedly due to a copyright claim, though the drone operator never filed one. But copies survive, circulating through research networks, and researchers have identified at least 17 similar structures across southern Nevada, all positioned above known tunnel locations. 17 known access points to a tunnel network the government claims doesn't exist. So where does this leave us? We have ancient tunnels, precisely engineered, impossibly old, extending thousands of kilometers beneath the American West. We have 70 years of systematic suppression, targeting anyone who tries to investigate or publicize the discovery. We have evidence of ongoing operations, modern security, recent excavation, electronic surveillance, classified research programs. We have satellite imagery showing maintained infrastructure above tunnel locations. We have seismic events consistent with machinery operating underground. And we have a government that refuses to acknowledge any of it, despite the mountain of evidence that has accumulated over 7 decades. What are they protecting? What are they looking for? What have they found? The official silence offers no answers, but the patterns of suppression suggest something profound. If this were simply about protecting archaeological sites or utilizing convenient underground space for classified storage, the response would be proportionate. Restricted access, sure. Classification of specific facility locations, certainly. But the response we see is disproportionate, aggressive, desperate even. It's the response of authorities protecting a secret so significant that exposure would fundamentally alter public understanding of history, technology, or the nature of human civilization. And that secret remains buried beneath hundreds of meters of rock, in tunnels that have witnessed the rise and fall of unknown peoples, that have survived ice ages and climate catastrophes, that have kept their builders' purposes hidden for 10,000 years or more. The Nevada Tunnel Network is still there, waiting in the darkness, silent except for the occasional hum of modern machinery echoing through passages carved by ancient hands. And somewhere in those tunnels, behind steel gates and electronic locks, modern explorers are searching for something the builders left behind, something worth protecting with classified budgets, legal threats, and 70 years of lies. The question isn't whether the secret will eventually emerge. Secrets this large always do, eventually. The question is, when we finally learn what's down there, will we be ready for the answer? Conclusion: the weight of buried truth. We began this investigation with a simple premise, that 3,000 kilometers of precisely engineered tunnels lie beneath the Nevada desert, that they've been known to authorities for 70 years, and that their existence has been systematically hidden from public knowledge. The evidence supports all 3 claims. Seismic surveys from multiple independent sources confirm subsurface structures inconsistent with natural cave formation. Declassified documents acknowledge discoveries that were immediately classified. Testimonies from scientists, engineers, military personnel, and civilian explorers describe first-hand encounters with tunnel interiors that defy conventional archaeological timelines. The tunnels are real. The suppression is real. And both facts demand that we ask uncomfortable questions about what else might be hidden beneath our feet, and what else might be missing from the history we've been taught. Because the Nevada Tunnel Network isn't just about underground passages in the American South. It's about the reliability of official narratives, about the willingness of institutions to bury evidence that challenges established paradigms, about the enormous gaps in our understanding of human prehistory that we've papered over with confident textbooks and academic consensus. If a prehistoric civilization built infrastructure on this scale, demonstrating geological knowledge, engineering sophistication, and organizational capacity that rivals or exceeds modern capabilities. Then what else did they build? What other monuments to their existence have we dismissed as natural formations or misattributed to later cultures? What other evidence lies buried, classified, or ignored because it doesn't fit the approved timeline of human development? The tunnels force us to confront the possibility that we are not the first advanced civilization on this planet, that the story of human progress is not a steady upward climb from primitive origins to modern sophistication, but a more complex narrative, one involving rises and falls, lost knowledge, forgotten technologies, and catastrophes that erased entire chapters of history. Native American oral traditions speak of the old ones, of ancient peoples who came before, of knowledge preserved in stories that academics dismissed as mythology. Perhaps it's time to listen to those stories with the understanding that myth and history are not opposites, but different ways of preserving truth across generations. Perhaps it's time to ask what else our ancestors tried to tell us that we were too certain of our own knowledge to hear. The Nevada tunnels are not unique. Similar structures have been reported and similarly suppressed in other parts of the world. Turkey's Derinkuyu underground city, capable of housing 20,000 people, officially dated to the 8th century, but possibly much older. The extensive tunnel networks beneath the Giza Plateau in Egypt, which mainstream Egyptology rarely discusses. The vast underground chambers recently discovered beneath the jungles of Central America using LiDAR technology. Are these isolated anomalies, or are they fragments of a global pattern we've refused to see because it contradicts our assumptions about prehistory? The suppression of the Nevada tunnels suggests that certain authorities have already answered that question and decided the public isn't ready for the implications. But hiding evidence doesn't change reality. It only delays our confrontation with truths that will eventually emerge. Because the tunnels are still there, they can be studied, they can be explored, they can be understood. Not today, perhaps, while classified programs and legal threats maintain the wall of silence. But eventually, satellite technology will become sophisticated enough that independent researchers can map subsurface structures without government permission. Eventually, the classified documents from the 1950s and 60s will age beyond their legal protection periods and enter the public domain, assuming they haven't been destroyed. Eventually, someone with the resources and courage will force the issue through legal channels, through public pressure, through simple refusal to accept official denials. And when that day comes, we'll have to reconcile what we believed about human history with what the evidence actually shows. We'll have to acknowledge that our ancestors, or someone's ancestors, possessed capabilities we've denied them. We'll have to rewrite the textbooks, not with conspiracy theories or wild speculation, but with the humility to admit we were wrong about fundamental aspects of the past. That day is coming. The only question is whether it arrives through gradual disclosure and scientific investigation, or through some dramatic revelation that forces the issue into public consciousness all at once. Until then, the tunnels remain, silent witnesses to a forgotten age. Monuments to engineering prowess that predates written language. Evidence that somewhere in the deep past, humans, or someone, understood things about stone and earth and time that we're only beginning to rediscover. And somewhere in those dark passages, behind steel gates and electronic locks, Modern explorers continue their classified work, searching for whatever the builders left behind, searching for answers to questions we're not supposed to ask. Perhaps, in the end, that's the most important lesson of the Nevada Tunnel Network. Not what they are, or who built them, or even why they've been hidden, but what they teach us about curiosity, about evidence, about the human tendency to prefer comfortable narratives over uncomfortable truths. The tunnels are there. 3,000 kilometers of engineered stone, carved with precision we can barely match today, stretching across the American West like the arteries of some sleeping giant. They've been there for 10,000 years, maybe more. They'll be there long after the current classification expires and the cover-up finally crumbles. They're patient, and they're waiting for us to be ready to understand what they represent. A challenge to our certainty, a reminder of how much we don't know, and a testament to the extraordinary capabilities of those who came before us. Whoever they were, whatever they knew, and wherever they went when they sealed their tunnels and disappeared into the silence of prehistory. The truth is down there, buried beneath Nevada sand and governmental secrecy. But buried things have a way of eventually coming to light. And when this truth finally emerges, complete, undeniable, impossible to suppress any longer, it will change everything we thought we knew about the human story. The only question that remains is this: are we brave enough to look and governmental secrecy? But buried things have a way of eventually coming to light. And when this truth finally emerges, complete, undeniable, impossible to suppress any longer, it will change everything we thought we knew about the human story. The only question that remains is this: are we brave enough to look?